Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the mainstream media and their coverage of Pierre Poilievre's first attempt at the vote of no confidence. Now, today is the first day that the opposition gets to put forward this motion, and even though we know what the NDP and the Bloc are already going to vote, Pierre is obviously still presenting it. However, as we take a look at the mainstream media's coverage of such event, you kind of see where they start to lean a little bit more to the liberal side. CP24 here, they wrote, Pierre Poilievre wants to topple the government and force an election. They make it sound like this guy is some crazy tyrant or dictator and he just wants to rule all of Canada. And then we move on to CBC. They wrote, Poilievre delivers campaign-style speech as he introduces a non-confidence motion. Not as bad. However, taxpayer-funded news outlet constantly turns off their comments. They never have their comments on any of their videos. They also decided to put out an article an hour after that video. Poilievre makes case for taking down the government to restore the promise of Canada, which is something that he said during his speech. However, all of this is coming a day after CTV News was caught fabricating a story, a plot line that they wanted to lay out of Pierre. And we know this because they put out an apology yesterday, only on their Twitter page. I don't think they've come out with a formal video on their news network, but they wrote, last night in a report on this broadcast, we presented a comment by the official opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, that was taken out of context. Not really, but we'll continue. It left viewers with the impression that the Conservatives' non-confidence motion was to defeat the Liberals' dental care program. In fact, the Conservatives have made it clear the motion is based on a long list of issues with the Liberal government, including the carbon tax. Hence why Pierre keeps saying carbon tax election. He doesn't say let's take down dental care. He says a carbon tax election. So like, I don't know how they're confusing all of this or making a out of context remark, but it goes on, a misunderstanding during the editing process resulted in this misrepresentation. We unreservedly apologize to Mr. Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada. We regret this report went to air in the manner it did. Hey guys, post-editing Mike here. So they actually did do a little apology on air, but it was just basically the head news anchor rereading what was posted there. I'll play the clip here and then we'll get back into the regular video.
In a report on this broadcast, we presented a comment by the official opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, that was taken out of context. It left viewers with the impression the Conservative non-confidence motion was to defeat the Liberals' dental care program. In fact, the Conservatives have made it clear the motion is based on a long list of issues with the Liberal government, including the carbon tax. A misunderstanding during the editing process resulted in this misrepresentation. We unreservedly apologize to Mr. Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada. We regret this report went to air in the manner it did.
Now I'm going to show you the video in question and what they're talking about and how they're framing this misunderstanding, even though it's a clear, blatant fabrication of them trying to spin something.
It's no wonder distrust in the media is at an all-time high. It's because Canadians are seeing more and more examples of how they twist the truth. But this one takes the cake. I've never seen anything like this. CTV News just got caught creating fake news. They were trying to promote a government talking point, and they took a clip of Pierre Poilievre making a statement about the carbon tax and giving Canadians a carbon tax election, and they spliced it together to do this.
That's why it's time to put forward a motion for a carbon tax election. That's why we need to put forward a motion for a carbon.
The Conservatives announced a non-confidence.
Pierre never actually said that sentence.
Now, quite a few people caught this little hiccup, if you want to call it that, by CTV News. However, this isn't a misunderstanding. Somebody actually thought about editing the video in that specific way. There's no way that you just cut out a section of that and then spliced together one portion of his sentence and the other portion of his sentence, and then took away all the other key points of his sentence as a misunderstanding during the editing. No, that was a clear decision to do so. And Pierre actually even called this out during his little speech today.
This will be a carbon tax referendum, a carbon tax election. And I know that the media has worked hard to try and avoid me saying the words carbon tax, as we saw in the extremely dishonest and fraudulent report from Bell Media-controlled CTV, who's a company that is whose bonds have been downgraded to near junk status as its overpaid CEO empties the books to pay his wealthy friends an unacceptably and unrealistically high dividend. But the reason why he and his other cronies at that company are going after me is because he knows that I'm standing up for the people against the crony capitalists and insiders like him. The carbon tax election. Here's the existential choice.
Now that was only a portion of his speech, and I'll probably do a follow-up video on the rest of it, because after the speech there is a debate portion where other party members of the opposition can direct questions towards Pierre, and his back and forth with them was interesting. So I'll probably do a follow-up on that. But sticking with the media aspect of this video, there is now a CTV banned from the Conservatives until there's an actual apology and explanation of what really happened. And I guess that means that there's no Conservatives going on to Vashi Capella's show, unfortunately. But David Cochrane of the CBC, on his Power and Politics program, had a little panel talking about this situation. And out of the 4 guests, only one of them, in my opinion, was the most sane. But the first woman that he poses the question to about this whole situation says something so ridiculous that when it pans and you see the guest beside her, her face is just like, what are you talking about?
The insinuation that the corporate entity that owns CTV is somehow driving this is an interesting development. And there's another development today. The Conservatives have released a copy of a memo that was sent to the caucus announcing a full boycott of CTV, saying that until CTV issues a formal and unequivocal apology, one that explicitly acknowledges the malicious nature of their editing and not merely dismisses this as a mistake or error, we will not engage with them. So effective immediately, no engagement with CTV News, including interviews, providing statements, or any form of commentary to CTV News and its reporters, and this extends to any meetings with Bell executives, staff, or lobbyists. This is a big move. What do you make of this, including the attack on the corporate side of things, which employs 45,000 people?
Yeah, it is a big move. Bell is so many things in Canada. It's one of those emblematic companies that's really, really hard to avoid. And so what's happening here today is very symbolic. There's the issue of the relationship between a Conservative leader and media, and how essentially there's an assumption of bad faith there, and an irritation and a refusal to come on air for several networks that has been in place, not just for him personally, but also some members of his team, of his caucus. So that's one thing. Now there's also the assumption of intent on the part of what happened internally at Bell, which is, I'm going to say it, verging on conspiracy theory, because you don't know at this point what happened. You're just making the assumption that this is what happened, and in a language that will be making a nod to people who do believe in some aspects of, corporation talking to, in a way that is disconnected from the reality of how a newsroom function. And so that to me is really dangerous, because it plays into a narrative of how basically it attacks the independence of newsroom from their owners in a way that contributes to the public distrust in media in a way that's very grave.
Now, I really wish I could say I was surprised that she went down the conspiratorial route, but as soon as she said that this is bordering conspiracy theories, I already wrote her off, because it's been proven time and time again. You could look at the news outlets in the States, you could look at the news outlets in Canada. The States, they're very left-leaning. I think maybe Fox News is the major right-leaning one there. Here we have the Toronto Sun, which is more right-leaning, the National Post, which I'd say is more center-right, but the rest are all left-leaning. Breakfast Television, CP24, CBC, clearly a little bit of CTV as well. And for her to then talk about they don't know what's going on in the newsroom and this hurts independence from the company is just so disconnected when just last week we had at the National Defense Committee, the NDP talking about how can we basically destroy and get rid of all the independent right-wing media outlets like Rebel News, True North, because they don't like what they're saying.
I mean, this certainly isn't anything that isn't new to Canada as well. In terms of even just like last week, we saw that far right startup. It's called Tenant Media. It was the front for Putin propaganda. They've been promoting very anti-Ukrainian messages. They do so about vaccines, residential schools, like you said, anti-LGBTQ plus attacks, anti-trans attacks. They're making videos. They're combining with Rebel Media does the same. True North does the same. We know, so that's part of that larger strategy. What responsibility do we have here in Canada to defeat that internally as well? How do we do that?
The fact that we have an MP sitting on the Committee for the National Defence of Canada openly asking how they can defeat small news independent media like True North, Rebel News, it's actually sad for one, but also very dangerous, because basically they're saying that they just want to be able to control all the information that's being put out there. Because Rebel News, True North, Countersignal, these smaller news outlets, yes, they may be more right-leaning, but they're actually popular because they bring stories that the mainstream media doesn't cover. And I would say these guys have to work a little bit harder to get the stories that they do put out. Take the guy from the Countersignal. Had to go to Tofino just to get that 10-minute interview with Trudeau on the beach there, which people have different takes on, whether it was scripted or paid for, who knows. But Trudeau only talks to the media that he wants to talk to. Jagmeet Singh has openly said that as well. He said that about Rebel. He says he doesn't support Rebel News, so he won't talk to them. This guy is the leader of a political party. A small news organization wants to ask him some questions, and he can't answer those. And it's not just the leaders. We have another Liberal MP who didn't like what a Canadian had to say, and so he decided to say that she was funded by the Russian government, and she actually was the camerawoman on that interview on the beach of Tofino, Cat Canada, and he said, "I would like to sincerely apologize to Cat Canada for my previous post in which I alleged that she is funded by the Russian government." He actually had to pin this comment to his Twitter page so everyone could see, and then he wrote, "I will be donating $1,000 to the charity of her choice." But this is the problem. They want to control all of the information and the media that you consume so that they can spin the narrative their way. Because as we know, if you have any other viewpoints or talking points than the Liberals or the NDPs, it's now labeled as misinformation, disinformation, it's a danger to our democracy, a conspiracy theory, you name it, it's all of the above. But as we get back to the interview now, the next guest, as I said, is the only one who seems sane. She's actually defending Pierre, the Conservatives, in their decision from what CTV did.
Kate, he stood up on the floor of the House of Commons and said that about a company that big pension funds are invested in. 45,000 people work for them. They've admitted the mistake. It was they said basically human error and incompetence, or like, you know, that happens in this business, right? I'm not saying CTV News is incompetent, but we all make mistakes in this business and we apologize for it. And they published it, and their chief anchor said it on the show. But to have them, to demand that they apologize for the malicious nature of the editing, to admit to a malicious intent here, that's a demand that's difficult for a news agency to accept.
I'm not sure that we should wave it away as just a mistake, because this is not a misattribution. It's not even taking part of the same sentence and applying it in a different context. Yep. This is taking a full paragraph, a variety of sentences that Pierre Poilievre said, taking bits and pieces from each sentence to craft a new sentence. Yeah. That is journalistic malpractice.
Okay, so just, and I'm not defending this, I'm explaining this. The sentence that Pierre Poilievre said is, that's why it's time to put forward a motion for a carbon tax election. for whatever reason, they spliced together different things he said in that scrum to create the sentence. That's why we need to put forward a motion. Now, it's not like it was changed to him saying something outrageous. It's not a sentence he uttered. It does not say it's about a carbon tax election, and in the way it was presented in the story, it makes it sound like he wants an election to stop dental care.
Correct.
So I get why they feel they're taken out of context, and CTV admitted to that and apologized for it. But the suggestion from Mr. Poilievre's tweets that the Bell Canada corporate suite is somehow weaponizing its news agency to get favorable treatment by the Trudeau government is a lot to say.
I don't think that they're feeling that they've been taken out of context. They were taken out of context.
Absolutely.
And
I agree.
When you are the Fifth Estate, you are in the accountability game, just the same as politicians are. And a quick apology the same day for something that is so egregious that action to be taken is not going to be enough when we're talking about the table stakes of not favorable coverage, fair and balanced coverage. And that's all Conservatives are asking for. They're asking for fair coverage. They're not asking for glowing reviews. They just want the facts to be reported as they are. So I don't think that it is, delving into conspiracy theory. We had 3 separate sentences. A Frankenstein sentence emerged as a result. That deserves to be called out, and I think that should be called out regardless of who says it in the House of Commons or which journalistic entity makes such a bad decision.
But Françoise, I don't know what happened in the edit suite of CTV. I know a lot of people who work at CTV. I respect them. They're good people. They're good journalists. This is a mistake. They owned it and admitted to it. The boycott, look, that's something, full disclosure, you're all aware, we've been dealing with this on this show. The Conservative hasn't sat down with me for an interview since March of 2023. Same sort of stuff.
I just find it so funny to hear David complaining that the Conservatives have been on his show for like over a year now. But what do you expect? He's very much left-leaning. He seems like a liberal apologist. He's always defending everything that they're doing. But also the CBC itself is quite corrupt. They just fired a whole bunch of people because they were out of money and they needed more money, but then still gave all the executives bonuses. The CEO, Catherine Tate, she just got a huge bonus. But as he's continuing this interview, now he asks a former NDP MP what she thinks about this, and just listen to her crazy answer.
You know what saddens me is that in Canada, and I strongly believe in that, good faith is always presumed. Legally, you have to presume that somebody might make a mistake out of good faith until you can prove the reverse. So basically, I don't think the Conservative, they can't think, they can't feel, but sorry, in law, feeling, thinking is not the proof.
What the hell is she talking about? A mistake in good faith. There was nothing good faith about this, and clearly it was not a mistake. They purposely cut up and edited what he had said in his statement to make it sound like he was saying something other than putting forward a motion for a carbon tax election. And they've openly admitted that it made it sound like he was talking about getting rid of the dental care program. So 1, it's not in good faith, and 2, it's clearly not a mistake. So this is just an idiotic take. But as we go on to the next guest, who at the beginning sounded promising, she admitted that they have the right to ask for an apology and get a proper apology, but then quickly went down the whole conspiracy theory rabbit hole again and equated it to Donald Trump, as they love to do.
Yeah, Michelle, look, the Conservatives were well within the right to ask for a correction and a retraction. And they got it, and they got the apology, and no one is disagreeing with that. It's this follow-up on the corporate side that strikes me as interesting, and now the boycott club has expanded. What are your thoughts on it all?
Well, my first thought, first of all, he is right to ask for an apology. How that happened and how that's just not correct. It shouldn't happen. And to demand a bit of an explanation as to why, I think is absolutely fair game. And to perhaps talk about and have some demands in terms of how and where the apology is redone and how it's broadcast and how it's distributed, fair ball. But then to go into some creepy way that there's some big, broad conspiracy, it's not just here again. Like, who does it remind you of? But again, Donald Trump. Like, what does he say about CNN? What does he say about MSNBC? They're all part of this whole, left-wing conspiracy to who knows what. So, like, it's a very bizarre way to take it.
It's actually not that bizarre or a conspiracy, because if you've ever seen American news or media, it's very left-leaning, very biased to the left. And I don't really think I've seen them ever say anything positive about Trump or nice about Trump, outside of maybe Fox. And our media isn't as bad as that. However, what CTV did here with this editing clearly was an attack at Pierre. And this just after Trudeau was on Stephen Colbert, where he said, oh, Pierre's been referred to as Canada's Trump.
Here's one thing, something that I'm sure that comes quite clearly when the UN General Assembly is that the far right and flirtations with fascism, at the very least, is rising across the globe. Even in Canada, your Conservative Party leader, your opponent there, has been called Canada's Trump.
So now you have the American media calling the Conservative leader Canada's Trump, trying to compare him, get people scared about that. So I wouldn't say that this is bizarre or a conspiracy. You can see it all around. But as we get back to the interview and we get back to that one guest who seems to have a brain, she doubles down against David, who's very salty still about not getting conservatives on his show. And she basically says, if we didn't have the telecommunications with journalism, things would be a lot easier.
Yeah, look, we have persisted through this. We keep inviting them on. I text with MPs, people in his caucus who want to come on, but they're not allowed to come on. They say they will, and then when they have to ask permission, it never actually happens. So we have duly elected members of the House of Commons who are not allowed to come on the national public broadcaster for, reasons because the leader's office has decided I'm not a fair journalist. So here we are. But the issue, Kate, that I think is interesting here is they can do what they want with the media. That's a choice they make. When you make allegations like this about a publicly traded company on the floor of the House of Commons, should you be doing that? This is what I wonder about. There are people with their pensions, mutual funds, their livelihood invested in Bell. I know it's gone through some struggles and laid people off, but is that what we're going to do to corporate Canada?
I'd point out that a lot of that disdain is directed very much at the CEO. And the executive team, and not at the boots on the ground that are laying cable. I think there is an important distinction there. This would be a lot less complicated if telecommunications companies were kind of out of the journalism business. It would be a lot less complicated if these companies weren't receiving either preferential regulatory treatment or, in some cases, direct subsidies. Because when a private company takes advantage of those things from the government, they are now in a new level of accountability. They open themselves up to criticism and vulnerability from opposition attacks in terms of trying to make a connection between what they're doing, their business practices, and the government. And we have created this news ecosystem in Canada that is very, very reliant on government funding. So I don't fault Poilievre for making that connection between these companies taking advantage of this and a news ecosystem that has some questions to answer. Right. They have to find their own self-sufficiency.
Post Media gets a massive amount of the subsidy money too, and they never criticize Post Media's ethics because of the editorial leaning there. But a mistake,
I wouldn't say that's off the table, David. And I think that
probably not.
This is actually a very good example of how there's no sacred cows.
Right, but a mistake made in an editing suite in Toronto to draw that to what decisions are made in the corporate suite in Toronto. It is connecting things that do not appear to be in evidence.
What I observed from that statement and Poilievre's comments in the House today is he is making this about kind of your treatment of tax dollars. Should Canadians expect that when Bell is given money or preferential regulatory treatment, that this is the kind of coverage that they're going to get in return? I think that's a fair question for Canadians to contemplate.
Look, we're out of time. We will talk more about this on the show tomorrow, I'm hoping. And if a Conservative MP or member of the staff wants to come on, the invitation is there. Anytime you want to take the opportunity, you are welcome.
Well, David, I wouldn't hold your breath on that offer. However, I might tune in tomorrow just to see if any Conservatives do show up. But if we go back to what she was saying, she's completely right. This is about what the taxpayers are putting their money towards, especially the media. And if Bell is getting the funding and then they're dictating what our journalists are presenting us, then yeah, us as Canadians are going to have an issue with that. And these quote-unquote mistakes that CTV just made are very detrimental to the faith and view that Canadians have on our mainstream media. So if they want Canadians to still trust them, then they definitely should come out, give a proper apology addressing this whole situation, and see what happens then. But until then, I definitely support the boycott. It is going to suck not to see any conservatives on Vashi's program because I do enjoy her, but maybe it'll be short-lived. As always, this is just my opinion on the whole situation. If you stuck out till the end, thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate it. Thank you to all the subscribers, all the members. I love to hear from you guys, especially in the comment section. And as always, I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks so much.